welcome everybody. This is our second in-person meetup, which is really, really awesome. I'm Matt. I'm a DevRel person here at Moesif, and then I'll let the other folks here introduce themselves. So Albert.
Hey everyone, I'm Albert. I am a product manager at Okta. Work on things like developer experience, and I had met Derric's CMO, Larry, at a product tank. So pre-COVID, we used to run product manager meetups, and met Derric and Larry at one of those, started talking about developer things, platform, and APIs, so gracious enough to invite us over.
Definitely. Thank you for being here, Albert. I'm Derric, the CEO here at Moesif. I guess I do everything that is not assigned to someone else yet.
Awesome. So today what we're going to be talking about is product management, which I'm sure is something that, even if you're not directly in it, affects you in some way, shape, or form. So it's definitely not an easy topic to chat on, but it is essential for us, especially as developers and as people that are working with product, to become efficient and good at. So let's start off with some pretty generic questions. I want to start off with one because there's a lot of ambiguity around exactly what a product manager does. So for you, Albert, what exactly is a product manager, and what's kind of the day-to-day, the optimal day-to-day look like for a product manager?
Yeah, sure. Do we have other PMs in the audience? PMs? Okay, quite a few. Does anyone not know what a PM does? It's okay. So I'll give my 30-second version, which is so our PM's job is to drive the vision for the roadmap, to drive clarity for questions around the business, and make sure that, well, I'm talking about software product management, but making sure that development is tied to the business goals. So it really varies depending on your seniority and the type of business and the industry that you work on. But we answer why. We answer why we're doing this, and we're held accountable for KPIs and metrics that the business is looking at to determine, are we building the right thing, are we driving value for our customers, and what are we doing next? So I think long-term vision is ultimately the theme and overarching responsibility of the PM.
Sure. Derric, did you have anything to add on that at all? Or that, anything that you've seen, because obviously at Moesif we work with a lot of PMs. Anything there that you would elaborate on, maybe that you've seen, something to extend on?
Yeah, as a PM, you're balancing 3 different teams at the same time, or 3 different stakeholders. You have the engineering side, who's in charge of delivering those goals. Then you have the sales and the revenue generating teams, who's after getting customers. But then the third piece is the customers themselves. So what do customers care about? What does the business care about in terms of revenue goals? And what then the engineering team can actually do in terms of delivering them.
Awesome. So most of us here are startup folks. Now, I've got a question that's not on my sheet of questions to ask, but at what point do you, obviously sometimes when you're working with a startup, you try to be scrappy, get going right away. At what point do you start to look more towards that product manager function so that you can then start to develop a roadmap? Do you do this as of day one? Do you do it once you've maybe got around, or something like that? Where do you think you should start with this type of thing?
When should you hire your first PM?
Or actually start thinking about, like Derric, for instance, you are the CEO and then you're also working in that product manager role.
Right. You should, you go.
Sure. So many times the CEO is the de facto PM, right? They're responsible for product, vision, working with customers, working with different stakeholders. But at some point, the CEO needs to focus on the high-level business goals, and there's things that a PM can be doing that the CEO doesn't have time for, right? So for example, doing user research, understanding, is this the right features that we should be working on or not? And if the CEO continues to do that for the life of the company, then you get into this product stalemate, right? You can't really move product forward. And so this is something that we're thinking about, when do you bring on a PM, is we can make sure we can accelerate product development, and I'm not necessarily the blocker on everything.
Yeah, I'd say if you are working at a company where the CEO is taking over product management roles, that's red flag for me. It doesn't matter how good of a background the CEO has in product. It's the culture of the company needs someone for their full-time job to be discovery, research, iterations, troubleshooting, talking to customers, helping with releases, like, helping engineers reproduce a bug. That is not what you want your CEO to be doing. If he or she is doing that is like a huge red flag. And I say that from personal experience. Like, I've worked for startups where the CEO thought he was a PM, and it was more like, well, I think that would be a better thing, or I think that we should put a button there, and and then no one can say no because he or she is the CEO, right? So definitely is a red flag. And also in that vein, when you have like ambiguity between the head of engineering and products, that's also a big red flag, because you should, like, the way I think about it is like, it's kind of like checks and balances, or if you're using like a government metaphor, like different legislative branches of like engineering wants quality and availability and security, and they're more milestone and like deliverables driven, whereas like PMs are all about, are we actually shipping value? Is there anything actually improving for the customer's life, or are we solving a problem? And those usually are at odds, and you really want two people on equal footing in the company org chart to be able to duke it out and try to reason with each other and come to a consensus, rather than someone just like calling those shots. Gotcha.
Awesome, that's great. So now we know obviously when we should bring a PM in. What type of skill set? Let's say we're all startup owners. What type of skill set should we be looking for in that initial PM hire? And then maybe as we're building out the team, what type of hard skills and soft skills should we be looking for?
So I would turn it back around and just ask, like, at what stage is this company in, right? Like, so let's say, for example, you're very small and you're trying to find product market fit, meaning that you're not sure, you have an idea, it sounds interesting, maybe you got funding, but you're not sure if it's actually going to scale or people actually like it. So in that sense, you would want someone that has perhaps more expertise in user research, usability testing, qualitative, maybe someone has a HCI, human-computer interaction background, to help you with that discovery. If you're like a publicly traded company, then you can look for someone more well-rounded. Or if you're having trouble connecting the business and customer user problems with engineering, then you might want someone that has computer science background that pivoted into product management, that can help sort of take requirements and then be able to slice them down into things that engineers can then go investigate and then go act on. So it all depends on the type of company you are, the stage of company you are, also how much money you have, right? If you don't have a lot of money, then you're gonna have to find someone that fulfills more of those boxes. So there's this like common PM triad of like, you have technical chops, or you have UX research chops, or you have business chops. And like most PMs are like strong in one, not the other two, or strong in two, but not all three. It's very hard to find a unicorn that's strong in all of them. Usually those people are like, at the top of the org already, and therefore not doing ICPM work.
Sure, and just to add to that, when do you think about bringing on a PM in terms of startup life? When you're in the seed stage, you're still after the product market fit, as Albert was saying, and so many times it's the co-founder or maybe the CEO that's driving that vision, trying to iterate and find those first customers that are maybe even paying a penny for the product, right? And so that's trying to cross the penny gap, which is something that David Sachs talks about in a few different blog posts he has. Once you get past that point, you're starting to think about how do you actually get the right process in place to ship features faster and get to the point where you can actually scale the company. And that's when you start thinking about bringing on a PM that might not necessarily be the initial co-founder.
Awesome, and I know you've lived that life, so. Okay, let me take a look here. I know I've got a couple that might be a little more technical than what we're looking at right now. So, here's one. So, when we're talking about product management, and obviously at Moesif we're very passionate about APIs, and a lot of people here are passionate about API development. What's the difference between being a product manager within an app company versus a company that is more aimed at APIs? So obviously almost every app company is using APIs, but what if you're just specifically trying to develop APIs for end user usage?
Yeah, so
Sorry, I might be a little convoluted.
No worries. I'll try to answer in my own way, which is like so if you're company is API only, let's say you're selling back-end services, it's a much different company DNA than like you're an enterprise company that has a UI and then all of a sudden they realize like 5-7 years down the line, hey, like we actually could make more money if we're packaging the API and selling our services and opening up more possibilities and have more extensibility of our platform. So those are like two totally different like cultures, if you will, right? Like one of them is playing catch up. Many enterprise companies are playing catch up, right? They founded their company and we're trying to grow as fast as possible. And when you grow as fast as possible, it's very hard for the PM or even Eng to push back and be like, hey, we should maybe, just take another quarter to fill all those missing API gaps. And like, we have all these internal things you can do that customers want API access to. And we're just gonna take like a half a year and fill those gaps. And that's really hard for any product leader to stomach or rationalize to sales, right? Because sales is always like, give me more, give me more. So I've actually forgot the question.
So basically, I guess to really summarize it is there a different skill set required for an API-only company versus an app company? I think you started to answer on
Yeah. So if you're at an API-only company, well, there's no UI, so there's no use for a UX designer or project designer, but it's much less involved, right? You're not doing Figma or mockups, right? You're purely shipping value in a back end. I'll talk about the similarities actually though, is like whether or not you have both a UI and an API versus API only. The one thing that a PM or leadership should do is drive clarity around the domain model. So by domain model, I mean like the objects in your universe, right? So I've not read the Moesif docs, but you guys are an analytics company, so like as a PM or Eng or technical leader, like the most important thing, no matter whether you're a UI or API, is that the objects and the relationships between them make sense. And you don't need a CS degree to sort of drive clarity and push for logic there, right? So you guys have reports, right? Like a report may have dates, and a report might have events, and those events might have parameters in them. And then understanding the relationship between those objects and how they flow and how they might be called for me to show a report of adoption or something is like extremely important that you have clear and logical relationships between those objects. And that's what I'm talking about when I say domain model, is like the domain model should make sense. And if it makes sense, then it doesn't matter if you're building for a UI or an API. That would just be more user-friendly.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at a traditional web app and an API, I mean, there is some similarities between the two. For example, speaking on the design of them, how do you have consistency between different areas of the platform? When you look at an API, are the endpoints similar? How do you get started with them? Are they completely different? Looks like different teams that built them, and no holistic language between the different APIs, which is very similar to a web app where you want a consistent brand, consistent theme, and so on. Now, where it differs is when you look at skill sets such as how technical you are or how you think about the developer audience. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to be a programmer, but you need to speak the language that developers speak. So, for example, how do they get integrated? What are their errors that they might run into with the API? Whereas when you look at something like Spotify, you're not necessarily caring about what a developer sees or error codes and logs and stuff. Instead, it's just more about clicking a button or what the UI itself is.
Awesome. So that kind of leads we talked a little bit about metrics there and what ones to look for. So how important are metrics in making a product decision? Because let's talk two scenarios, okay? So you have one where you have lots of metrics and you decide whether you're going to go with the metrics or go with a gut feel that maybe you have experience in the area, or you have very little metrics. How do you make a decision at that point? And I'll let you talk on both. So lots of metrics, but you have a gut feel, or very few metrics, and how do you deal with that scenario? So I think they kind of have to contrast in a certain way, right? Very opposite ends of the spectrum. I know it's a long question.
Yeah, so metrics are important. Every PM is measured based on what they say they're going to build, how they think they're going to improve outcomes because of what they built, and then did you actually improve or did you not? So the way I think about it is there's essentially two main oversimplified buckets of like leading metrics and lagging metrics. So your lagging metrics is like what everyone ultimately cares about. And every business is the same. It's either like adoption, less churn, more money, like something of that nature, more users. They're all the same. Doesn't matter what industry, right? It's going to be some variation of those things. So you ship feature X and then you hope like people churn less or people sign up more or they upsell more, or they buy more SKUs. But usually those are lagging metrics, right? Because like, and it's correlation, not causation. Like, okay, if I ship this like shiny new thing that like brings people back or this new, competitive advantage feature, like, and I see revenue going up, that's correlation, right? Like you actually need a very large sample size to have like statistical confidence that what you did actually impacted that lagging metric. So you actually shouldn't be trusting that. It's more just directional, and you look at the business as at a macro level, and that's more like on the C-suite level. For leading metrics, it's more things that you can like quantitatively look at, right? So adoption, consumption, time spent in app, likelihood to use another feature if they use the first feature, and those are things that we can try to connect the dots and on a day-to-day are more useful to look at. And then I would say in enterprise software, like a lot of times all of those are just either red herrings or like the wrong signal, because sometimes you just gotta talk to people, right? And the like especially enterprise software, like the total addressable number of possible people that you can talk to about this super mundane thing. Like I work in identity, right? Like there's not that many like identity engineers at enterprise companies in the world, right? There's a lot, but like for them to talk to you, right? So a good user research interview to do like qualitative litmus test or sentiment to understand their pain points and the nuances of how they feel about your product or solution, I think is more valuable than looking at like a Tableau dashboard sometimes for me.
Definitely, you need to balance both qualitative and quantitative feedback. It's easy to get buried in metrics and not have the right data. And so many times we actually recommend make sure the metrics you're tracking, you can actually trust them. You can many times run into an issue where you have all this data, but you can't make sense of it. And so try and bucketing, maybe a couple of North Star metrics, one on adoption, one on, say, usage of the platform itself, and one on maybe retention. Do people come back? You just have 3 key metrics that you're tracking on a weekly or monthly or whatever your cadence is. And then from there, you can start building more advanced and elaborate metrics to go after, but only once you understand what they should be, right? Because if you're just creating metrics out of thin air, then you might be tracking the wrong against the wrong things.
Awesome, and I would agree with all of that. So let's pivot towards, now we talked about metrics, and obviously there's challenges within that. What would you say are, let's say, top 3 challenges that you come across as a product manager, whether that's coming from talking with the executive suite, or whether it's from talking with even employees who are developers, or maybe lower on the totem pole getting feedback, because it is really a loop in a sense, right? Regardless of what the status is within the company. So really the top grievances or the top challenges that you have as a product manager, and that could be at Okta, it could be at other places as well.
Top challenges with regards to
Just like you walk into
just in
work,
general.
You walk into work and you're like, this is going to be a day.
Okay.
It's a loaded one, but
Yeah. So maybe 2 off the top of my head. So I think maybe a lot of PMs will resonate. Like top challenge is like time management, right? So you have a lot of context switching that's like natural to the job, and you have very limited time, especially in this COVID era where like start of COVID, we're in like 8 hours of Zoom calls because every little touch point is like 30-minute phone like Zoom call. It was really tough, right? And even before that, right? I remember like, just like finding time to have a bio break in between meetings, and then that's not even like your spec writing time or like talking to customers, and like that's time that you need to be quiet with yourself and sit down and think and like, what am I looking at? Like, what should I do next? What are the most important things? So time management, and then I guess other big like challenge as a PM for me is like stakeholder alignment, right? So the more senior you get, the more product scope that you have, the more product scope you have, less chance you are going to be able to like unilaterally make a roadmap decision just by yourself without impacting like 7 other vertical teams plus the platform team, right? And everyone has their own MOs, everyone has their own career. So like anytime you're asking for like a platform feature or like another vertical team to help you with your feature launch, then you're basically asking for a pretty big favor. And when you can't get what you want, I think that's like where the art form of being a PM comes into play, of like knowing how to negotiate, knowing how to do a quid pro quo, and the PMs that can negotiate that conflict well and get what they want, they have more impact and therefore able to like progress up the career ladder better. So I think time management and like conflict resolution, stakeholder management.
What if the coffee maker goes out? I think for me, priority is an important piece too. You know, it's very easy as a PM to context switch a lot, as Albert was mentioning, and so not every single incoming task needs to be sorted out right away. I do believe in things like, you know, inbox zero and making sure at the end of the day, you know, every single email is either answered or somehow has a task associated with it. But with that said, doesn't mean as soon as the email comes in, you need to, you know, do that research, drop everything you're doing, and respond. Otherwise, you're never going to get the actual, you know, meaty work done. You know, like you mentioned, spec writing or doing user research or looking at metrics, which are also equally important as that, you know, random email that a customer sent you.
So I'm going to do one last question, and then what I want to do is ask if anyone else has questions out here, because I'm sure there might be a couple. So let's say that you are going to, you've founded a company and you're going to hire a PM. For someone who's aspiring to be, like, let's say a junior PM or come into it, what kind of skills or what path would you recommend for them to start on? Maybe it's something to do with the path that you took, or maybe there's, obviously hindsight is always 20/20.
Yeah.
So you might see stuff that, oh, if I had done this a little differently, I might have been able to progress in it or make better decisions through my career as well.
Yeah, so earlier I talked about, you know, this triad of technical chops, business chops, and design, research. And what you need to work on depends on your own self-reflection of where you need to improve. So for me, I didn't have an engineering or CS background. I had a customer background. I was an entry-level sales guy. I talked to 70 customers a day, so I knew exactly where their pain points were. I knew what bugs they were reporting that weren't getting fixed. So that was in my DNA. It wasn't hard for me to sell that bit about myself to a business, a company that was interviewing me as a PM. But what they always asked me was like, but are you technical? You know, are you technical, right? So my own path was, in order to show I was technical, it wasn't about learning to program, because that's another red flag. If they want you to write code as a PM, then they just don't know what a PM is for, right? So that doesn't mean that knowing how to write code is bad. It just means that that's really not where you should be spending your time. How I proved to people that interviewed me early in my PM career that I was technical was I spent a couple of years doing pretty sort of grunt work, black box, like QA testing, right? So understanding software development lifecycle, understanding the differences between companies in terms of how they ship code, their different environments, being the first to be in a bug bash or in a flare or like a customer outage, being the customer representative there to be able to drive clarity in terms of like understanding what went wrong, why it went wrong, who might be responsible, and then on a happier side in terms of like releasing the thing, right? So if you're shipping to like a slow rollout, right? Understanding that. So for me, at least my path, I had a lot of learning to do in that regard, the software development lifecycle. And once I had a critical mass of war stories of my own, anecdotes that I could share of like where I actually ran into problems, struggled, failed, or helped my teammates succeed in that technical problem, then I was able to like answer that question like, but are you technical? So if you are technical, let's say you are a CS background or engineer and you're trying to pivot into product, then do you understand business? Like when people, when a public company like reads off their financials, like do you know what EBITDA is or like any of these things mean? Why does the CFO care about that metric? Why is the CEO talking about ARR and those types of things, right? And then on the design side, like sure, you don't need to, if you're a PM, you don't need to, just as you don't need to code, you don't need to be able to do like high fidelity mock-ups, but you should be able to sketch out something on a napkin. You should be able to whiteboard. You should understand the difference between a wireframe versus a mock-up versus a prototype, although those things are more blending nowadays with modern tooling. But you should be able to know what the difference between those things, and also like how to ask like a non-prejudiced question, like if you're trying to solicit information. Like so all of those it's like a rotation of skills. And actually there was a product tank that I hosted where there was a PM, and I can find for the group later, that had a really excellent framework for self-evaluation in terms of evaluating your own weaknesses and like areas that you need to work on, and like objectively going through and thinking like, what are these things that I need to work on? And I think people that do that, if you put some rigor and put your own experiences through a framework, like you're able to fill those gaps like much more efficiently, and will help you round out like that triad of technical and social and or design and business skills.
Sure, and just to follow up with that, I would say having customer empathy, or what I call developer empathy in the API world. On top of that, always questioning the product, can it be better? Where do you improve? And this could be any process in the world, right? Whether it's purchasing software, signing up and looking at an onboarding flow for your favorite tools, and just taking a look at everything around you and what can be improved with it. Because many times it's just taking all these little tidbits of information and saying, hey, this button or this flow could have been a little better. And then you look at another tool and you say, oh, this could have been better. And then talking to customers and understanding, why did they decide, not to buy this tool, or why did they have a struggle with the tool? They couldn't find a particular feature or something like that. And this also goes back to your experience. So for example, if you're an engineer, then talk to customers, understand their pain points, understand what gets them to buy, what gets them to move. And if you're a salesperson that's trying to move into PM, talk to engineers. Why do they, hate salespeople? why do they, why are they a skeptic of sales and marketing? Just to get inside their head and be empathetic towards their needs.
All right, awesome. That's good. So let's put this out to the audience then. Is there any questions that anybody has for... Dan's got one?
Yeah, I had one actually related to sales. So I was wondering, as a product person, how do you balance short-term sales pressures against having a cohesive vision for the product experience?
So when you plan a product roadmap, I like the jar analogy, right? Which means you're putting rocks into this jar, and you're also putting a bunch of sand in it, right? So if you keep listening to customers and you keep trying to go after sales goals, what happens is you fill up that jar with sand, and you never have a chance to put any rocks in. And those rocks are your big epics, the big features that move the vision forward and move the company forward. So what I like to do is start planning out what are the big epics that could actually move the product forward in terms of product vision. For us, it was that monetization feature and a few other things that we're putting in there. And then you start filling in these bug fixes, polishing the product, trying to improve things, and slip in, here and there, what is, incoming from maybe from a sales call or a support call or something like that. So it's trying to balance both sides and not losing track of the overall product vision.
Yeah, I guess like for the PMs here, like how many of you have like a feature request board of some sort at your company? Like most do, right? And how many of you find a lot of value in reading feature requests? So like feature requests, things that customers want, there is value, don't get me wrong. Tells them, they're asking for, I want a button so I can download the report so I don't have to wait for your, something like that. But the thing is it's almost always useless, right? Because the feature requests from customers are always them telling you what they want you to build. But what you actually want them to tell you is the problem. We only care about the problem that you're having, and then you can tell us how you might want us to build it, but it's almost never like the best way to build it because they're not thinking about the platform. They're not thinking about how other customers might want to solve the same problem. They're not thinking about how it might be more efficient. Maybe there's an open source library I can buy to have that button that you want, or something like that. So the feedback is valuable, but the valuable part of the feedback is only the problem statement, never the actual request or what they actually want. And I would say I would take it to extreme that it's like the only thing that matters is what the business objective is, right? So if the customer request isn't related to the business objective, like they want the app to be easier to use, better UX. It's clunky. There's too many clicks. And your business objective is like, look, we're trying to go public, so we need to like grow the user count. Then like, sorry, we're doing 0% of that work. Like UX is going to have to wait. We don't care about your design system. Like we're just going to have to wait another day, right? So, and obviously you're not going to say that to a customer. You're going to be like super polite or politely fire them or just like be like, that's why we have customer success people to like round those things out and soften like what, ornery PMs like me might say. So there's people in the company to do that, but yeah, you have to be like ruthless, right? Because it's so easy to fail.
Awesome. Nate?
When you have a product-led growth motion and you're adding new features, how do you decide where in the plans a feature should go? Like API access, for example, is almost exclusively in the enterprise tier. What are your thoughts on having it across the board, or why do you see that as a trend?
For API access, or like as in
Yeah.
how would you define product-led growth?
Having like 4 tiers, usually free, basic, pro, enterprise.
So
like
freemium.
SaaS offering.
Premium?
And you're talking about how to divide up the product roadmap based on those tiers?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I don't think there's a generic way to answer that because it again depends on your goals, your KPIs, like what are you trying to do with the business. So for example, if your goal is to get more integrations, right? I could see how it'd be easier to rationalize shipping public APIs so that you can have like ISVs and integrators, for example, building extensions or plugins on top of your core platform. Or if your business sells to extremely large enterprises and they need to manage thousands of objects and the UI is not good for that, then you're going to rationalize shipping the API first, right? Because that's going to scale, that's going to let them write scripts or use a CLI or something to automate what they're doing. If you have to deal with like DevOps, anything with automation, replicating environments, like APIs are not going to be a hard sell. So it really depends on what the product is, what your business is trying to do. And do you have an example? Like we could try to like
Sure.
self-diagnose.
So Moesif is releasing a new billing feature. Yeah. So should that be across all plans? Should that be a more upper echelon plan? Just curious. Your thoughts.
All right.
Probably shouldn't
So when we look at different features and how do we package those different features, at any given point, there's 2 different buyers we're always thinking about. There's a person that's signing up, which many times is maybe an engineer or a PM that is after their particular goals, which is I need to make myself more efficient, or I need some analytics, or I need to solve this particular problem I have. Then there's the other set of folks, which is your VP of engineering or VP of product, right? And they have very different goals. They might be after compliance needs. They might care about connecting this platform to Salesforce, or they might care about single sign-on and using Okta. And so you've probably seen that a lot of different SaaS tools, hey, a lot of the initial value you get is on the free tier or one of the lower tiers. But then as soon as you need to connect it to Salesforce, or you need to connect to Okta, boom, you need an enterprise plan. That's because the individual developer doesn't usually care about Okta or Salesforce, but the VP does. And so what you're doing is you're trying to sell to both audiences at the same time and figuring out what are the right levers that push people to that, higher tier. So in our case, for the new monetization feature, we really want people to, test it out, get set up, and try it, right? And it's not something that we're looking to push people to enterprise with that particular feature. Instead, it's actually going to be more around, compliance, auditing, and other things that, the CFO or the finance department would care about, right? So as we build those things out, we say, hey, you need this? Okay, you got to upgrade.
Yeah, and I mean, I can put in a little spin here too, because so it's also important to remember that when you're looking at product-led versus sales-led, that's really the two paradigms, right? So product-led generally tends to have very good onboarding, very low touch. But then when you're sales-led, it tends to be a higher touch in terms of maybe a longer sales cycle. If you, for instance, a lot of the time, if you have an enterprise customer, they might not go through that self-serve flow. But yeah, I guess what I'm saying is when you're looking to figure out where that feature should go, it depends on what the product is. If it's a product that you can leverage by volume, so something along the lines of Moesif in a sense, where we can say from 0 to 100, it's this tier, from 101 to 1000, it's this tier, then deciding where those product features go doesn't really matter that much because you're going to be billing on usage anyways. But if you are going towards trying to make it so that those features are in the enterprise portion. Sorry, I'm a little confused right now where I'm going with this. The biggest thing is a lot of people get confused about what product-led means. Because product-led really means that you are, for our purposes for developer first products, are really about a developer can get there, sign up, and move through the flow and use it as they need. They can sign, if they need another tier to get a feature, they can get that feature without going to a sales team. Sales-led motion, obviously very different. It means that you get that paywall where it says contact sales. And you're like, oh shit, I might drop this tool now. That's what happens a lot when you're looking at a product-led feature. You have developers that, we're sitting at home building something, and we get to the point where we don't want to talk to a salesperson because I'm building a little app for my kids or I'm building an app for my grandma. So that's where you might decide on where to put the feature and looking at it product-led versus sales-led. Sorry for a roundabout answer. So any other questions out there? Jordan?
I have one. So more around like product marketing. So we have product managers, right? But then we have PMM, which PMM has a really good relationship with sales. They have a good relationship with their product managers, right? They have a good, really like they're cross-organizational, right? So I guess what I was curious about is when you've worked with PMMs like in the past, what has just like really stood out to you as being like, they killed it, this was a great strategy to help promote my product and help, bring more users to my product?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so great PMMs tell the world about how great your product is, right? So they're evangelizing what you're doing and packaging it for consumption for a broader audience. So I think I rely on my PMM, who's fantastic for everything from copywriting to positioning to coming up with what they call bill of materials of all the things that they might want to create, all the like deliverables they might want to create, artifacts, whether it's a blog post or a webinar, or we're going to do like a hip Twitch session about this new developer feature that we shipped, to our Octane. Every year Okta does like a user conference and deciding which features get shouted out there. So I don't have enough hours in the day to think about those things, nor is that my specialty in terms of like framing it in the right way and knowing how to refer to a feature, because we have Gartner and Forrester industry analysts who are going to be asking about what this feature does for the company, and for them to be able to frame it and package it along with other features so that there's a cohesive product story. So I think of myself as a storyteller, but I think PMMs are like more important storytellers. And the best ones do it very well. They do it efficiently, and they know how to pick their battles, which things they should fight for more attention, and which things don't need as much attention.
Sure, and I would say really, really good and really pointed messaging, right? You need to reach your buyer. And it doesn't matter how many ads you're running and how many people you reach out to, if the copy on your website or the initial flow that they see is horrible, they're just going to bounce, right? So having really good messaging, I think, is probably by far the most important, and ensuring it's consistent across the entire product or platform. With that said, knowing where to adjust that messaging based off of different areas of the platform. So for example, your docs might have slightly different messaging than the landing page. Is it tailored towards a developer, or is it tailored towards a business user? Is it tailored towards the VP, or is it tailored towards an individual contributor? Right, so making sure that messaging is pointed, I think, is the most important.
Some companies, they roll pricing as well and product strategy into PMM. They do that at Okta. It hasn't always been that way, but pricing is its own beast. Like if you're at a startup and you're a PM or a CEO, like you might just have to wing it and read a book on it, and you might hire an outside consultant. But for a larger company that has like a lot of SKUs and a lot of products that or new business initiatives, PMM drives those things. And then product strategy is like its own beast of industry research, right? So you're basically paying like, let's in enterprise software, this is cutting in and out. I don't know. For enterprise software, like you have this top-down motion, right? So you have an executive sponsor for buying like Moesif for like some reporting tool or Twilio, right? Like enterprise thing, and to be able to understand their motivations in terms of like what they want to do, like I've seen that rolled into PMM as well.
Awesome. Any other questions out there at all?
When you have an API-based product, how do you manage changes in that product? Because API is essentially a contract with your user, right? I don't come from that background, and I'm kind of scared, like, now I have to build a public API. Like, how do I ensure that, it's going to be long-lasting? If there are changes, I can incorporate them. What are the pitfalls? There are processes, tools, maybe you have to think about.
The biggest thing would be versioning for sure.
Yeah, so I'll share a story. So I used to work for an ad tech company. We're on the demand side, DSP. So we're selling ads, basically making money by taking a cut off of like digital ads as you see on Facebook or Google or Instagram, whatever. And so there was this whole Scrum team, and their job was to maintain a healthy integration with the Facebook marketing API, which if you're not familiar with is like the reason why, yes, awful, and also, does anyone work at Facebook? Okay. It will never be one person's fault, but basically, they have versioning, right? So for any strategy for managing change, right, it's just like you have the leading version, you have the current version, and then you have the lagging version. So at any given time, Facebook Marketing API has those three versions. And they give you like ample notice, right? Like 3 months, 3 to 6 months of like, here's the leading version, there's a breaking change coming in this leading version. It will be the current version on this date. And so, make do, like figure it out. Otherwise you're gonna stop making money because your ads integration is gonna break, right? So you would think that would be enough, but they introduced breaking changes at any point, and you know what the answer was? It's like, well, we're Facebook. What are you going to do about it, right? Like, you're just going to choose someone else? Like, that's not even an option, right? They have a huge amount of eyeballs, impressions, right? So Facebook is beholden to just doing whatever the heck they want to, even though they actually have a structured like change management process. Another actual, like, I don't know if the engineers here will roll their eyes at this, but another actual valid strategy is just API v1 forever. Like, never version it. Just always have v1, never have another version. And like, I don't know if this is true necessarily, but I think of like Oracle, right? Like your legacy tech giants, right? They don't make breaking changes. They don't refactor their like platform. Like they just build on top of it and just like slap duct tape on top of it, right? So you could have it where you're just like, there's a facade layer, there's an API gateway, or you're just like funneling traffic through, a proxy to the old endpoint. Like, and that's valid too. And I don't think that's like, just because you don't have change management down doesn't mean that that's bad, right? The only thing that matters is your company or org is successful. So if you're successful and changes are predictable and you keep in close contact with your developers that rely on those things, then whatever strategy you employ is fine. I think communication and like predictability is the most important thing, right? So whether or not you do Facebook where you're like 3 versions, but then they just like have a breaking change out of the blue anyways. So it's like, that doesn't even matter.
Sure. Don't break their shit and over communicate if you're going to do anything with their stuff. It's a little different when you're using a consumer app like Spotify or something like that. If the design changes, sure, okay, I have to go find a new button, but at least I'm not stressed about it or trying to work overnight to fix things. As a developer, you want to sleep at night, right? If something happens in the middle of the night where API is broken or it shifts to a new version that I didn't realize because I deleted every single spam email I got, then shit, now I'm scared. Now I got to fix this stuff, and I really don't want to. So over communicate and have a strategy in place. So that may mean identifying the impact to customers, who is actually using this API that you plan on deprecating or removing from service, emailing those folks, sending out reminder emails, maybe it's every week. You're still using this API, we see it being used in Canada or United States, and you're using this SDK when you're accessing the API, you accessed it 10,000 times. Give them metrics so they know that they're using it still. And then many times what companies can do is what's called a brownout strategy. So you might turn it off for an hour on a Monday or something like that, just for a brief moment of time, and that will sometimes trigger the alarms that a company might have set up saying, oh, this service I'm depending on is no longer working, right? But don't turn it off for weeks on end without giving them a chance to move forward to something different. And let them know what the alternative is. Is it a different API? Is it a different service? Maybe a different company they can use? Just over-communicate these changes so they have a path forward.
And there's a very abstract way too, just use GraphQL, and then you can get around the contract portion of it. Awesome, no, that's very good feedback. Any other questions that we have at all?
Yeah, I got a two-part question. Probably one for Albert and one for Derric. So, Albert, is it a good time to be a API product manager now? And for Derric, related, what do you see in the health of the API economy with like Rapid API and Postman getting recent funding? Have you kind of seen the growth in the API economy with your business?
I think it's a great time to be an API product manager. I don't know that is a concept that should exist. I think it shouldn't exist because you should just be a PM, and if your product has a surface area that needs to have an API, then it should be part of your PRD. It should be part of your thought process. You should think about the domain model, how it impacts the UI as well as the API, like we talked about originally. But I do think it's a golden age because, like, essentially you're asking about like developer experience, right? It's like how does a developer user of my product or feature, how are their problems solved? And we're seeing a huge trend in enterprise software where like every company wants to be a platform. And we have like darling examples like we have Twilio, we have Stripe, we have Heroku, one that I've seen recently, Algolia, Moesif, companies that are like very, very API first and understand that's their core audience and that's how they're going to grow. And then you have everyone else who's like, ooh, maybe we need like a channel partner strategy, or like we could bring on some platform partners that could, we could scale the business without having to hire 1,000 more salespeople, and therefore we need APIs. And in either case, I think like it's an unfortunate position to be in, right? Because if you're in that latter bucket of a company that's realizing they need an API strategy, chances are they have debt, they have internal APIs that need to be publicized, and you basically have like the entropy of the entire engineering org working against you, of like you needing to be a like amazing sort of really charismatic person to convince everyone else that they need to take a step back and like re-architect or refactor to ship those APIs for you. But I think it's a good problem to have because like in terms of platform API PMs, like we're basically, I would say like where UX was 2 decades ago, of finally caring and believing that developers are people too. And it's not that they care about them as people, it's that they're like, oh, but they could make us more money, so we should care about them a bit. But some of the things that we work on, like making documentation better, like you would never fathom of arguing 20 years ago that like a sign-up form for a consumer software website, like a social media website, like, oh no, the form friction, that's fine, no worries, like people will sign up for Facebook, right? Like So that's the same thing that we're treating developers now, is like, oh, maybe we should make the docs like intuitive and give them more examples and samples and SDKs and things like that. So that's what I think about it. So I think it's a golden age, because like anytime there's problems, then it's good to be a PM. If they have everything figured out, then there's no use for us. So not as fun to be a PM.
Of course, it's definitely a great time to start an API first company or be a PM at an API first company. If you look at how software was developed, decades ago, you literally buy shrink wrap software, came in a box, you had to go on site and set up that server. Luckily, the SaaS wave came, and you no longer need to buy that box, that black box, and plug it in, and you just had to log into a website, and that was all you needed. But now what's happening is, those SaaS ecosystems are pretty closed, and so it's always a decision between, do you buy this SaaS product or do you build it yourself? What APIs are enabling is you can have the best of both worlds. You're basically choosing your building blocks and saying, hey, I need to buy this service from this company, but I need to integrate with this internal system that I already have, and this other workflow that I need to actually create. So now you're able to pick and choose what you need as if they're Lego blocks.
Awesome. Any other questions at all? Time for everybody to split out and have a drink at this point, I think?
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Derek, is it your birthday?
It was, yeah.
It was. It is today.
It is today.
LinkedIn told me it was your birthday.
Yep.
And you're spending your birthday like having a talk with us. That's awesome.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, happy birthday, man. Should we sing happy birthday, or do you?
No.
All right, happy birthday, man. I just saw that and thought I would call it out.
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming, and hopefully we can all have a drink together right now.
Okay, cool.
Are you spending your birthday at Meetup? I guess it's
Something tells me you wouldn't have it any other way.